Sport is stressful and we can't really get away from that. If we think about the nature of competitive sport at any level, the environment and the culture is one where lots of physical and emotional demands are placed on performers. And that includes athletes, coaches, and even officials. Stress isn't necessarily a bad thing, of course, but if it's left unchecked and unmanaged, then it can lead to burnout. Burnout is this ongoing syndrome of emotional and physical exhaustion, reduced personal accomplishment, so feeling like no matter what we're doing, we're just not really achieving anything worthwhile, and devaluation or depersonalization, depending on the context. And this is when we develop a bit of a cynical attitude towards our involvement in sport, and we don't really value it as much as we maybe used to. But there are lots of things that we can do to manage stress before we get to burnout, or if we're already there, to maybe manage and alleviate some of those burnout symptoms. The first thing that might be useful is having an understanding of how stress works. Now, there are lots of different models that try to explain this, but they all more or less boil down to the same thing, and that's stress being an imbalance between the demands that we face on a day-to-day basis and then how well we think we can cope with those demands. Demands can be big things, or they can be little things. They can be things to do with the competition environment, the organization that we work in, or maybe personal life stresses that sometimes get in the way. How well we think we can cope with stress might be influenced by our social support networks, our own emotional management or problem-solving skills, or even just how tired we're feeling. And of course, all of these things, our demands and our coping resources, are constantly fluctuating. So, self-awareness becomes a really important skill for managing stress. Developing an awareness of the demands that we face, how we normally respond to those demands and try to cope with them, whether what we're doing is effective or not. Awareness of all of that can help us to recognize when our stress responses are changing and when the normal stress of performance might be spilling over into something else. Self-awareness also helps us to recognize that gradual creep of escalating stress. And it really is a skill because we can get better at it by deliberately taking the time to reflect on our stress experiences. We can also think about how identity is tied into burnout. Sport can be a really important part of our lives, but it really can't be everything. And when we tend to over-identify as an athlete or a coach, as a performer, we're putting all of our eggs in one basket. And when we don't have anything else in our lives, it can feel a bit like we're stuck or trapped in it, rather than doing it because it's something that we genuinely love. This feeling of entrapment is also linked to burnout. So thinking about other areas in our lives, other things that are part of who we are, can be a really vital part of alleviating or at least attenuating some of the stress that comes along with being a performer. Linked to our identity, we might also consider our values. Now, values are the things that are important to us, that guide how we live our lives. We might have values in our performance role, sure, but we might also have values in all sorts of other domains. So for example, we might ask ourselves, what kind of person do I want to be in terms of my relationships, my health, my recreation, my personal growth or spirituality? And then we might think about how much we're putting into living up to those values in those various domains. Are we working towards what we value in lots of different ways? Or are we only focusing on the performance domain? Considering ourselves as whole people, rather than just as performers, and working towards what we value in multiple domains or multiple parts of our lives, can help to put some of the stresses of performance into perspective. It can help us to avoid or alleviate some of those burnout symptoms. And it can help us to enjoy more sustainable careers.